that I am absolutely obsessed with pelvic floor health. I write a ton about it over on saddlesorewomen.com. I have interviewed a bunch of people about it, both on the Consummate Athlete Podcast and also just for the websites. I think it's so important, especially for cyclists and runners and anyone doing any, really serious exercising. I mean, obviously, as well as the general population, but athletes, I think, tend to have more problems, but kind of brush them under the rug. So I was super excited to have Abby Bales, a physical therapist out of New York City, on both the Consummate Athlete Podcast and then on here. Over on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, we spend an hour really diving into pelvic floor health and all of that, important stuff and what makes pelvic floor health really important and how you can kind of be controlling it on your own and when you need to seek extra help. But a big part of that, and the thing everyone knows about pelvic health, is that Kegels are sort of the move to do. And it turns out they're not always the right move to be doing. But I had Abby come on this podcast in order to teach us exactly what the perfect Kegel should be, why we need to do it, how to do it, and any kind of tips and tricks for it. So it's a really fun little mini-sode, especially if you listen to the Consummate Athlete Podcast and we're kind of interested in finding out more, or maybe this episode will make you want to find out more by listening to the longer form podcast. Anyway, Abby Bales is a physical therapist who owns her own practice, Reform PT. It actually just opened up in January. And she specializes in working with pregnant and postpartum athletes in the city. She's also a mom of two, a marathon runner, a wife, and a super fun lady to talk to. We get into all kinds of topics over on the Consummate Athlete, but in this one, we really zoom in on Kegels. Again, with this podcast, I'm hoping to make it sort of short and sweet, little pieces of information that can hopefully change your life a little bit. This one definitely has impacted mine, I'm not going to lie. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into Abby's podcast about how to do the perfect Kegel. I couldn't actually tell you what the hell one is, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could just get into it real quick. What exactly is a Kegel and how do we know we're doing it right?
So the short answer is no one really knows if they're doing it right unless somebody is assessing it. So
yes.
Like I said, any number of times I've assessed a woman who you would think should be able to do it and just can't do it. The best way that I have found to teach women who are unable to do a Kegel how to do a Kegel is the first thing that we do is we start either sitting. So if we're sitting in a chair with our feet on the floor and sitting up tall, the first thing that I do is to teach you to draw your abdominals inward without using your breath. So you can do it while you're talking and you just draw those abdominals inward without sucking your air in. So it's not about sucking your belly in from the side like you're taking a bikini picture. It's about being able to use the musculature of your abdominal cavity to pull your belly inward. That's pulling up with the handlebars that we were talking about in the basket analogy. Okay. So you're already pulling up on your pelvic floor by drawing your abdominals inward without taking an inspiratory breath, without going and breathing inward. So just by pulling inward, you can feel that your pelvic floor lifts. So the next thing that you do if you are trying to do a Kegel is you try to think of pulling your vaginal muscles up towards your belly button like you were going to lift a pencil between them. So if I were to put a pencil between your vaginal muscles and you were pulling your belly in, I want you to also pull that pencil up towards your belly button.
Okay.
And so sometimes that's hard for women to do sitting because it's against gravity. And so I have women do this when they are on all fours. If they're having difficulty with that, sometimes we'll use some accessory muscles and talk about squeezing your glutes as well to pull that upward motion if a woman is having difficulty engaging those pelvic floor muscles. The way that you know whether or not you need to be focusing on doing Kegels is if you are incontinent. If you are unable to stop the flow of urine when you're using the bathroom, and that's test, it's not a treatment. So can you stop the flow of urine when you're going to the bathroom, when you're urinating? Yes, fantastic. Your pelvic floor you are able to contract your pelvic floor musculature in order to have and urinary continence. If you are losing urine involuntarily, if you're losing feces involuntarily, something else needs to be assessed. I don't need women to focus and obsess about doing a Kegel. Whether or not you're doing it properly will help with childbirth, will help with continence. But if you're continent, you don't need to really focus on the Kegel. It's something that's happening with your everyday movements, and that's great. Okay. That's where you need to focus a little bit more on the whole approach, the core work, the glute work, the adductors, and then incorporating it all together with a Kegel is where you're starting to get that like stronger pelvic floor. But that really, you want to have that assessed whether or not you're doing that properly by a pelvic floor physical therapist. But the Kegel, if you are doing the perfect Kegel, it's incorporating that drawing in of your abdominals, that lifting up of your vaginal muscles away from, I like to do it in sitting because you can feel like if you're lifting your vagina away from a chair. If you're sitting in a hard chair, if you're sitting on something soft that you can feel sitting in your vagina, you can feel when you're doing a Kegel that you're lifting away from it. Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting there right now, you're pulling your belly in, you can kind of feel how that naturally pulls your vagina away from your chair, and then you pull your vaginal muscles up even further. You can feel whether or not that's happening. It gives you that feedback on like a hard chair or a surface that's hitting you right at your vaginal opening.
Yeah. Now, are there any, I guess, I'm thinking like common mistakes. And to me, when I try to do it, a lot of the time I find that like, my glutes or like my inner thighs are like activating regardless, like, even if I try not to. And then I'm like, oh, I totally did one. And then I'm like, I don't think I did one.
So in that case, then I would move you to a quadruped position on your hands and knees, because it's taking, gravity is a certain force, right? 9.7 meters per second or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so when you take gravity away from it and put you in an anti-gravity position on your hands and knees, it means you have to contract less. So you don't have to use those adductors as an accessory muscle because you're not going against gravity. So I would put you on all fours, and then I would ask you to do the same thing. And that would often take away the adductor squeeze. Also, I don't tend to start women on their back with this if there's dysfunction, like you're talking about, like you have a lot of accessory glute and adductor action while you're trying to do it. I would put you on all fours because it puts your abdominal cavity against gravity, but not your vagina. Right. As opposed to your abdominal cavity going against a hard surface like a floor. That's really hard to do. So I would say try it on all fours, and same kind of thing. Pull your belly away from the ground and then Kegel and see if it's easier for you to do. And really then you're just working on a strength thing, right? So it's gravity is a certain force. It's like a weight. It's pulling you down. So start anti-gravity and then work your way up to standing against gravity. And then once you can do it against gravity, unless there's a serious dysfunction, there's no need to add vaginal weights or anything like that. It's just a matter of doing it a couple of times a week if you had previous dysfunction.
Is it weird that I immediately, as soon as you said vaginal weights, I was like, oh man, how much can I lift? Clearly I like strength training too much. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No, it's absolutely, like, it's not weird at all. I think we, certainly women who are athletes who are dealing with this kind of thing immediately go to, like, they want to be able to see, in a numbers game, how much can they do? How much better are they getting? How strong can they make their pelvic floor? But really, the strength of the pelvic floor is to keep you continent. It's not to like bulk up and gain a lot of musculature and lift as much as you possibly can. It's just it just needs to function. It just needs to function properly when you want it to, when you need it to. But no, 100%. Like, that's the Kegel tracker is also like that. Like, you can get like pretty anal retentive about how many Kegels can I do in one day, but you want to be careful with how much you're doing because you don't want to end up with an overactive pelvic floor either. With a ton of trigger points, because that causes its own problems. So I would say, like, if you're continent and you are not experiencing any pain, don't obsess about doing Kegels. Focus on your whole body, focusing on pelvic stability in general. And that's where things like Pilates and yoga can be fantastic for women as a complementary exercise.
By the way, the use of the phrase anal retentive was the most amazing pun ever when talking about this stuff. Sorry.
It's a little on the nose. It's a little
on the nose. Actually, that led me to my last question of, are any of these, we mentioned, we were talking about the LV Kegel thing, are any of those actually like a reasonable thing to get, or are they all kind of like smoke and mirrors?
No, it's great. There are so many amazing tools that we can use. You know, every time I go to a conference or I go to a continuing education, I learn about a new tool. You know, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I get no kickbacks from any of this nonsense, like nothing. Mm-hmm. I love the LV tracker for someone who is, I have assessed who I want them to do Kegels. If they are a numbers person, a data person, I love it. It syncs with your phone. It's a really cool thing. I also love the Pelva wand that you can get on Amazon. You can get it, and that works so amazing with trigger points and overactive pelvic floor musculature. They're fantastic tools that you can use. But there are all sorts of really very cool things that you can get. You know, if a woman is having pelvic pain during pregnancy, there are some incredible things. Diane Lee, who is a pelvic guru of vast proportions, she created this belt that for women who are having pelvic pain, and it really supports them exactly where like their ligaments should be supporting them but aren't supporting them. So there are all sorts of tools and tricks that you can use, and, you know, depending on what you're dealing with, but you don't necessarily want to self-select yourself into a category of someone who needs a pelvic wand for pelvic floor overactivity, because you may not know exactly where you need the pelvic wand, mm-hmm. and while you may not hurt yourself, you may not help yourself either. And it's the same thing with the LV tracker. You know, you really want to get assessed as to whether or not you're doing that Kegel properly, because if you think you're Kegeling and you're actually bulging, you're really doing yourself a disservice and maybe starting to cause some dysfunction. So you want to get assessed before you decide to get one of those tools to help yourself out. But afterwards, yeah, if you had an assessment and you need to be keeping track of your Kegels, I love all sorts of things that help you keep track of that.
Awesome. All right, perfect. Thank you. That was exactly what I wanted.
Yay!
No,
I'm so happy to help.
I'm super excited about this. I mean, like we were saying on Twitter, like I love this stuff. It's just stuff I'm so interested in and so passionate about. And I mean, the amount of women I talk to in cycling that have a lot of these issues is crazy. So to be able to kind of give them some more information is awesome.
Well, it's soul crushing when someone who wants to be active can't be active.
Yeah.
Or they can't do the activity that they love. There's nothing worse than a woman coming to me saying, yeah, I used to run 10 years ago, but ever since I had kids, I pee when I run, and so I don't run anymore. That is infuriating to me, and it makes me so sad for them. So I definitely want to destigmatize the idea that it's all very natural. You know, we don't need to normalize this kind of stuff. We need to support each other, and we need to support women and get the word out. And
mm-hmm.
and you know, even if, yes, it's a business that I run, and it's my business, what I do, but at the same time, I hope to really provide a lot of information for women in my newsletter online. That's why I want women to sign up for it. And, you know, on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and stuff, that's where I want to be able to reach a broader swath of women who are dealing with these issues, and other physical therapists. Like, it's a great way to educate and connect with other physical therapists who maybe aren't pelvic floor physical therapists, but they're seeing a lot of pregnant women and they don't know what to do with them. So it's an informative tool that I hope that going forward that my company can be a place where people can come for science-based information.